State Senator Rob Sampson is here from Wolcott, and it's always exciting to check in with Rob and to find out what's happening at the state capitol because that's scary stuff. Rob is from Wolcott. Thanks for being here, Rob.
Good afternoon, Todd. I'll try not to disappoint and add to the exciting plan for afternoon talk radio.
Well, you can't. You are the keystone of it, I guess is the word. So the pressure is on. So tell us what's going on. What are the pieces of legislation that concern you the most and thus should concern us?
There is a laundry list, as usual, of very toxic legislation making its way through the General Assembly. But I guess the thing I would focus on right now is that we have a real chance to actually do something to address our election law in the state. And unfortunately, the Democrats just are completely uninterested in addressing the problem. The committee process is more or less wrapping up in the various committees. Basically, you know how the system works. You know, the individual bills are proposed, they go through public hearings, and then the committees debate and vote on them. And then there's a little lull in between, and then we go to the House and Senate for final passage. So the committees are wrapping up, and yesterday was the final day for the Elections Committee. And the Democrats, after bugging them literally for years to address the problems with our elections that the Bridgeport scandal kind of highlighted, which is all about absentee ballots. They came up with a bill that addressed the issue in the most minimalistic way possible, basically almost non-existent, and that is that they want to put cameras on drop boxes, which, you can say that might be a step in the right direction. I mean, it's debatable. I mean, we had cameras on drop boxes in the 3 subsequent Bridgeport elections. It didn't seem to do much. The same terrible activities continued. So I tried yesterday to offer a series of amendments that would actually solve the problem, and we can talk about those if you like.
Well, one of the issues that appeared with the video cameras was that had it not been for somebody leaking those videos to the Gomes campaign in Bridgeport and those becoming public, that evidence wouldn't have been known because there was hundreds of hours of video that you had to look at to find that malfeasance was going on. So what would be the process that would bring that video to light, even if there was cheating that was plain as day for the cameras?
Right. Well, the bill that they have mandates that the 169 towns across the state, wherever they have drop boxes, will have to keep 24-hour video surveillance, and they've got to deliver that upon request to any citizen within 5 days. I think the only other requirement would be that they have to maintain that footage for at least a year. Mm-hmm. And I'm not suggesting that it's a terrible idea, although it's going to be an expense to towns that they haven't obviously considered before, and it's going to be passed on to taxpayers. And my concern is that I don't think it really addresses the problem, because the issue has nothing to do really with the drop boxes, other than, that is one of the means by which somebody like Wanda or someone like that who is, abusing the absentee ballot, procurement process, that might be their final destination. But they could just as easily put those ballots into a U.S. postal mailbox or even drop them off at the town clerk's office. I mean, it's not really going to make that much difference. And I think putting the cameras on the drop boxes is simply going to encourage people to choose one of the other means. It's not going to stop the activity. And I would like to address the real problem, which is that our absentee ballot system, our mail-in voting system in Connecticut has like unbelievable holes in the process.
Well, so talk about that a little bit, because is it that automatically, if you have early voting, if you've taken the ballot out of the domain of the officials who run elections, if it's no longer, the custody is no longer continuously in the space controlled by the officials, then you're opening and asking for, it seems to me, you're opening the process to hanky-panky, aren't you?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what they've done. I mean, we've always had absentee voting in the state of Connecticut, but it was limited. It was limited to people that had a legitimate need and excuse to vote by absentee because they legitimately could not appear at the polls. But that's changed dramatically over the years. And, the pandemic was the opening that the Democrats needed to effectively create lawful ballot harvesting. And that's what's transpired. And we're
define that term, please, ballot harvesting.
Well, I mean, ballot harvesting is the system by which ballot applications are obtained and distributed to either real people or non-real people, and then completed by either real people or non-real people, and then returned back to the town, and then the ballot is distributed to them, and then either real or non-real people return those ballots. And ballot harvesting it can be lawful as long as everybody involved is on the up and up, and those ballot applications are being completed by the legitimate person. They're filling them out for their purposes. And the same thing with the ballots. Or it can be a situation where people are simply obtaining these applications and ballots and completing them on behalf of others without their knowledge. And that's the danger of all of that.
We're talking to State Senator Rob Sampson, and we're discussing a piece of legislation designed to clean up the process, or designed not to clean up the process. This was written by Democrats without Republican input, or what?
Right. Well, I mean, there was some Republican input. I serve on the committee, and I certainly have been screaming at the top of my lungs for years now about how we don't need the drop boxes. And then I was at one time advocating that if you're going to have drop boxes, then you should have cameras on them. So I haven't really backed away from that position. But what I'm concerned about, Todd, is that, this is the Democrats' answer to what's happening in Bridgeport. And I just want to make sure that the people of Connecticut understand that is just, a shell game. That's smoke and mirrors. It's not going to address the problem. The real solution is, number one, to fix our voter rolls across the state by having proper audits of Election Day registration, proper audits of absentee ballots. These are situations where people register to vote and then they're able to vote, but then the registration is sent to their home and then it's returned in the mail. And that should, raise a red flag, to the registrar. Say, oh, wait, maybe that wasn't a real person. Or maybe that person's registered in a different address or something like that. We have no auditing process. We do very little to maintain our voter rolls. We saw during the pandemic that, people were receiving, stacks of ballot applications to their home for the people that used to live at that address, for example. And the fact of the matter is that, when you start to do that, some people are going to fill those things out. People are going to fill them out for their kids that are away at school or for their elderly parents. And that's happening across the state. Now, I mean, it's hard to say, what the significance of that is. I don't know if it's, a handful of ballots here or there, or it's in the tens or hundreds or even thousands, but it is happening. And sometimes elections are decided by as little as one vote. So it does matter. So step one is fix the voter rolls. Step two is to stop with the unsolicited mailing of those ballot applications. Go back to a system that requires the actual voter to request their ballot application. That would fix a lot of this mess. And then ultimately put some penalties in place if people are caught interfering with the process. Those three things I think would go a long way to solving the problem. But the Democrats have no interest. They're trying to convince the public that they've actually attacked this issue and tackled the issue with the cameras on drop boxes. And like I said, not a terrible idea, but also not going to fix the problem.
But my impression is that the purpose of having absentee balloting or early voting, the purpose of it is to loosen up the custody issues that have to do with ballots, to create the possibility to more easily cheat. Looking at what happened in Bridgeport and looking at how glibly it was treated by Governor Lamont and other high-ranking Democratic elected officials who ended up endorsing the cheaters. Team Cheat was the Ganim team in Bridgeport, and they went along with the whole thing and then endorsed the guy for re-election. So that, to me, confirms what seemed obvious already, which was the purpose of this loose custody system of voting was to create holes they could drive a truck through, and they had the trucks all packed and gassed up and ready to go.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with you at any of that, Todd. I think that the law changes that have gone into effect over the last decade, expanding access to voting in the state of Connecticut, are all designed to be used for rigging the system, make it easier to cheat, and allowing Democrats who have a much more significant ground game, particularly in the cities, to exploit those holes in the process. I know that's a bold claim. You're not afraid to make it, and neither am I, because it's quite obvious to me. And the Bridgeport video, I think, was just the proof, that this is actually happening, so that they could no longer deny it. But now we're in a situation where the Democrats are trying to pretend that they're addressing this problem and they're going to fix it with these cameras. And it's just so frustrating to me that some people are actually going to buy into that and say, look, they solved the problem, Sampson. Why are you still complaining? Because I know full well that's not going to make any difference. I mean, for example, I don't think anyone was fined or charged. Certainly no one's going to serve any jail time for what happened in Bridgeport. And I think that's because I don't think, even though that video footage is conclusive from a standpoint that something bad is happening, I don't know that you can actually get to the point of convicting someone for a crime, because it's hard to say exactly what Wanda or anyone else was actually depositing into the boxes.
No,
so
but
that type of thing is going to continue.
Well, they did empty the boxes afterwards, so they knew what was in there, and they would know if she was putting something, or if anyone was putting something other, like if a birthday cake was going in there, we would know, because they would have seen it when they opened up the box, right? There were ballots in there, presumably. And this is what you would have an investigation to find out. Investigations put people under oath and get their testimony, and they look for documents to confirm things. But the fact that there is video, it is nice, but it doesn't give anybody a lot to go on who's being cheated. If you're going up against Mayor Ganim trying to unseat him in Bridgeport, and the cheating is going on as it has been in recent election cycles, apparently, because this is Democrats suing Democrats over their cheating. And presumably Mr. Gomes, who used to work for years for Mayor Ganim, when he was running for office, he understood what the cheating methodology is that Ganim uses, and he was ready for it, and that's why he had somebody lined up to dump the tape for him into his hands so that he could watch the tape, and he had somebody sit and watch all those hours of tape, and they found the cheating going on. They found the evidence of it. So how about a little investigation? Nobody cares in the power structure, and I think that's what you're trying to address.
Absolutely. Yes. No, and there's another bill that they have where, of course, the Democrat solution is to create some top-down bureaucratic oversight committee to watch, the city of Bridgeport or any other city that apparently, would have some sort of election day irregularities. And that's fine, I suppose, except that's not the solution either. I mean, creating a bunch of political animals to watch some other political animals in another city, I don't think is the solution. What you need is an actual, investigation, and someone who has the authority to actually charge people and convict people of crimes when they're caught. And that's what's lacking from this whole system. There's very little in the way of deterrent, and there's a million, as you mentioned, holes in the system big enough to drive a truck through. And that's what I'm trying to address.
Yes, because structurally,
eliminate that.
People can say after the fact, oh, well, you're just, you're making a big thing out of a small thing, and you can't fix all the cheating. Boys will be boys. Well, if boys will be boys, you want to have a system that's well designed so that if they want to try to jump over the fence, there's some barbed wire there that might catch them and dissuade them from wanting to try to jump over again. And that's what you're saying, is that the system should be a tight one, not one that's been loosened deliberately in order to make cheating easier. And from what I've learned from people I've talked to in the cities, the way it works is they want to be able to walk. They build a relationship with people who live in dense areas of housing, like projects or apartment buildings, and they'll walk through at certain times a year and give gifts to voters, and they get to know their citizens, and then they cultivate those relationships, and then when they're walking around with a gift come election time, they ask for people to sign a ballot that's already been made out, or some scam like that, and they collect ballots. And it's a pretty simple kind of methodology that seems obvious now that we have proof of cheating in Bridgeport, and we have proof of the Democrats' lack of interest in doing anything about it.
Right. And I think, part of the problem is that, this has been going on for decades. The only thing is it was much more limited in the past, because the only people that could legitimately vote by absentee ballot were people that, had an excuse. They're indigent, or, they're bedridden, or they can't get out of their house, or they're elderly in some way. They can't make it to the polls. That's the only way you could, use an absentee ballot. So in those cases, that limited the pool of potential voters that you could fabricate if necessary. But nowadays, since they've expanded the definitions of sickness and who's actually eligible, so that anyone and everyone is eligible to vote by absentee, now you've opened the floodgates. So we went from having a very, very small percentage of ballots cast by absentee in an election. I mean, 2 or 3% is what it used to be pre-pandemic. And now we're talking about anywhere from, 10 to 30%. During the pandemic, it was even more than that. And I think given the right circumstances in a controversial presidential election, something like that, I think you could see huge numbers again. And that is the problem with the system, is that everyone knows, even the Democrats, full well that system is not
tight enough.
It's not tight enough. You can't police it, and they exploit that, and for their own benefit. And as you pointed out, the only time it really becomes an issue for them is when it's a Democrat on Democrat primary, and then we hear about it. But even the people that are involved in those Democrat on Democrat primaries that end up disgruntled about the results, and I'm speaking of Senator Marilyn Moore, who was Ganem's last opponent.
Previous to this cycle.
Yeah, that's right. And the same thing happened to her that happened to Gomes, presumably, and she made a big issue out of it and complained. But as she had the opportunity to vote on it in the state Senate last year, when I offered amendments during the special session, she voted against the amendments.
Yeah, and that's what we call a good soldier, right? We're talking to State Senator Rob Sampson. Rob, we've got just 2 minutes left. Anything else you want to cover, or anything else you want us to know about this election law that is being considered now?
Yeah, well, I mean, we're like I said, we're wrapping up the committees, and there are many, many bad bills that are, have passed out of committee, and you'll start to see them showing up in the House and Senate for crucial votes. You've probably talked about a number of them on the air, but you can be certain that I'll be up here, doing my best to stop those things and trying to keep you and your listeners informed about the things that are coming. But we've got to stay vigilant, because the Democrats are certainly not slowing down because it's an election year.
Well, you want to give us a quick tease on one in 60 seconds? Is there a standout one for you?
There's a few of them. I mean, there's a bill that would actually put a DEI director in every state agency. And that person would actually be charged with comparing any bit of policy decision making that the commissioner of that agency is making with the equity standard that they're developing. And of course, this is going to cost a fortune to taxpayers. I mean, these folks typically make in the 150 to 200K range, and multiply that times 24 state agencies. I mean, now you're talking millions and millions of taxpayer dollars being wasted on this. And obviously, these folks are up to what I consider to be no good. They're going to use race-based and gender-based discrimination in their policy making, and they can try and spin it any way they want, but that's what it is. You've got that. You have constitutional amendments, 2 constitutional amendments pending, one that would effectively enshrine abortion and even gender-affirming care as protected in Connecticut under our constitutional law, the same as we have equal protection for race and gender currently. Crazy stuff. And they also have another amendment that is going to enshrine environmental protection into our Constitution. And, that sounds really nice on the surface, but ultimately that is going to be a major interference with individual property rights, effectively giving the state the
control over your property.
Over your property, your soil, your air.
These people just can't be trusted, Rob Sampson. State Senator Rob Sampson. Wolcott, Republican, thank you for being here. It's great to hear from you, and let's do it again soon.
Always my pleasure, Todd. Thanks for having me.